It's my absolute privilege to be introducing our speaker for tonight, Professor Jo Fox. Professor Jo Fox joined the university in June last year as the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, which also makes her my boss. Now, Jo is also a distinguished professor of modern history who specialises in propaganda, disinformation and psychological warfare. She's the author of several books and articles on these subjects, and you may have seen or heard her in the media to discuss the impact of disinformation, not just on historical society, but also on contemporary society too. Most recently, she was the principal investigator on an Arts and Humanities Research Council-funded project analysing disinformation during the COVID pandemic, and was a co-investigator with colleagues in Durham on a Leverhulme Trust-funded project on the Political Warfare Executive. We may also know Jo's work as an advocate nationally and internationally for the value and importance of the humanities. Jo began her career at Durham University as a lecturer in modern European history and became the history department there, the first female professor in 2010 and the first female head of department in 2016. In 2018, just to complete the hat trick, she became the first female director of the Institute of Historical Research, the UK's National Centre for History. And in 2020, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Research and Engagement at the University of London and Dean of the School of Advanced Study, the National Centre for the Promotion and Facilitation of Humanities Research. So she started at Durham, but she's seen the light and she's come to us here at Newcastle. And we're all thrilled to welcome her and with her inaugural lecture on fake news, historical perspectives and contemporary challenges. Thank you so much, Jo.
Thank you, Annie, for such a warm welcome, and it's great to see so many of you here to talk about this important subject, and lots of colleagues too, so no pressure for me there then. Okay, we've all been enjoying the Winter Olympics, right? And we know it's been a battleground for snow sports and for medals, but did you also know that it has been a psychological warfare battleground as well? I'm going to have to move across. It's not moving. Oh, there we go. It will now flick forward 10 slides. Okay. So throughout the games, there's been a Russian coordinated bot and troll campaign that has been active. Impersonating legitimate news agencies, look at the logos, they're very, very close to European news agencies, to discredit and vilify the Ukraine. Through false stories about the behaviour of their athletes, from spitting in other athletes' food, corruption, illegal behaviour. Even Snoop Dogg, according to these posts, refused to shake hands with Ukrainian competitors. Now, these images have circulated widely across social media platforms, and what it is the latest salvo in an aggressive cyber campaign to support the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which took place 4 years ago today. And that the Olympics was targeted in this way points to the ubiquity of fake news and disinformation that now threatens to overwhelm our infosphere. Well, the term fake news is a catch-all. It's a shorthand for the more precise processes of misinformation, that is, incorrect information not necessarily circulated with malign intent, and disinformation, which is the deliberate creation and or sharing of false information with the intention to deceive and mislead audiences. And fake news is just one element of a new lexicon to describe what we see as a new media environment. Disinformation, misinformation, troll factories, data mining, hackers, bots, sock puppets, echo chambers, info storms, cyber troops, deep fakes, filter bubbles, meme warfare, clickbait, catfish, debunking, pre-bunking, post-truth. Now that language, that new language, perhaps deceives us into thinking that we've encountered a new phenomenon, one that presents a novel threat to society. The current environment in which propaganda and disinformation operates certainly presents new challenges. We are seemingly confronted by the perfect storm. The speed, scope, and scale of modern communications, including communications by non-human agents, complicated by the uncertain status of social media as neither platform nor publisher, and the hidden algorithms used to control and order the information we see, the building frustration of those who feel disempowered by elites and fears that the masses are vulnerable to mass suggestion, the desire of some to destabilize the entire social and political system through psychological warfare campaigns by creating the situation where all views are of equal value regardless of the evidential base, where psychological warfares can operate under the radar of a largely unregulated wild west of the internet, and where there is a shifting power structure in the infosphere, away from traditional media and the state and towards new players such as social media, new social actors, individual agitators, and even the bot or AI. So nothing here is certain, and all may be plausible, where communication networks are fast and global, and where, just as last year, the UN Global Risk Report identified disinformation as not only one of the most dangerous global threats, but the threat we feel least able to solve. Now, the combination of these factors is certainly historically distinctive. But what elements here are genuinely new? And I'd like to spend some time today pointing towards some constants, some essential characteristics of propaganda that are transhistorical, and some new aspects to our infosphere that will require us to think differently about how we confront disinformation. Let's start with what's new. There's been a shift in power and the ownership in communications, and specifically, who is able to undertake a campaign that is capable of mass influence. New platforms and access to them, although certainly not global in reach and scale due to the variable access to technology across the world, have enabled groups and individuals without traditional power or money to become propagandists themselves and to communicate across the globe at speed and at scale. Now that has a balanced scorecard. We're simultaneously confronted by communications that might harm democracy and a social media that has facilitated social movements, challenging injustice and campaigning for democratic rights. And perhaps the most unique aspect of today's propaganda, though, is that for the first time in history, a significant proportion of our communications, what we read and encounter, is likely to be generated by non-human agents. So today, more than half of new articles on the internet are generated by AI, and around 20% of content shown to a new subscriber of YouTube is AI generated. And that is AI that is capable of drawing down and repackaging information from multiple sources, and that is capable of distributing that information at scale and at significant speed. So not only is our information increasingly generated by non-humans, but it can be delivered by AI masquerading as us as people, sometimes with malicious intent, and making it really very difficult to distinguish between fact and fiction, and especially with the emergence of deep fakes. I'm going to show a video now. I'm putting a warning on the front of it. It has some interesting language, and there will be an advert because it's from YouTube, and I don't know what one it is, and it may not be generated by people. Okay. Phew. That'll do. I'm happy with that. There we are. Okay. So, as you can see, it is very difficult now to distinguish fact from fiction, and those deep fakes are getting better and better. And now, almost as soon as an event has taken place, fake content is generated. And take these images. These are the most recent images of a captured Venezuelan president, Maduro. These were circulating at the same time as events were unfolding. And within 2 days, 5 images, which are fake images, had already attracted 14.1 million views on X. Now, that is a particular type of warfare that has been increasingly used, and particularly if you think about the info warfare in Ukraine at the moment, and that gives you the potential of AI here, that you're getting propaganda for the first time in real time that goes into an information vacuum that traditional media cannot fill. It cannot act at this pace, and AI is fueling some of the speed of that. And not only can AI move at that kind of speed and generate this kind of image, but it can tailor content to local circumstances at that same speed and at scale. It's got high volume, and it can target very, very clearly and easily because of our interactions online. And that now is that modus operandi of information warfare. That's a bit different. Of course, fakes have always been operational in psychological warfare campaigns. The political warfare executive that was responsible for Britain's subversive or black propaganda campaigns during the Second World War mastered the art of fakery to deceive the enemy, and so to undermine morale and cause mass confusion across Europe. It was deliberately designed to act in concert with military operations. Now, the PWE established several fake radio stations, planted malicious rumors based on fake stories using their operatives. They mimicked Hitler and other leaders in a similar kind of way as we've seen there, putting words in their mouths for propagandistic purpose. They produce fake ration cards, currency, clothing, coupons, and stamps. This is one example produced by the PWE in April 1943, and it replaced Hitler's head on the stamp with Heinrich Himmler's head, that insinuated that Himmler, then head of the Gestapo, had designs on the German leadership, or had in fact performed a coup, and that the fifth column was active in the Reich. Now, despite what we may think, our awareness about propaganda and the fact that it might be present has increased over the past century. We're probably more informed now about propaganda and its inner workings than we ever have been. That doesn't, though, make us immune from its effects. Far from it. The most important question for scholars of propaganda, either looking at past propaganda or present incarnations, has been, how does it work and what are its effects? Well, what does history tell us about that? Propaganda and disinformation work on multiple and complex levels. They're dynamic, flexible, mutable, fluid. They involve multiple methods and techniques deployed singularly or in combination. But one thing is absolutely constant, and that is, to function effectively, propaganda depends on pre-existing beliefs and belief systems, thoughts and attitudes, and that humans will engage in producing and consuming it regardless of any warnings about its potential dangers. And here we might pause to reflect on the drivers for fake news. In December 2016, the BBC reported on Veles, and you can look at this BBC report and follow it up after the lecture. It's absolutely fascinating. It's a small town in Macedonia, getting rich from fake news. So for a short period, the city was the epicenter of a US election disinformation campaign. And there, young entrepreneurs were repackaging alt-right rumors and stories, rebranding them with a new headline and paying Facebook to share them with like-minded targets. Each click they got brought new revenue. 1 month's work in that field generated an income of about 1,800 euros per person, compared to the average monthly salary in Veles of 350 euros. Now, the Veles story surfaces a fundamental myth about disinformation, that it's always created for political purposes or for ideological purpose. It can also be about money. If it didn't pay, the teenagers of Veles almost certainly would not be doing this. And there's historical precedent for this. Salacious stories about atrocities in occupied Belgium, for example, during the First World War, sold. Like numerous images and stories about the sacking of Louvain in August 1914, or the infamous stories of babies on bayonets. Newspapers carried these stories because they increased circulation. Sensationalist authors, artists, filmmakers all jumped on that bandwagon. And not all of that material was motivated by propagandistic intent, although it may have propagandistic effect. As the historian Jay Winter has astutely observed, proselytizing and profit were not mutually exclusive. The Veles story also reveals another fundamental aspect of propaganda, that on some level we seek it out, we engage with it, we consume it, and we share mis and disinformation because on some level it satisfies human needs. The first need is for pure entertainment. Disinformation tends to be more salacious, more intriguing, more stimulating than regular news or information. And humans have a fascination with the bizarre, the conspiratorial, the titillating. Again, not a modern phenomenon. And here's an early version of a fake news item. You may know it from Sarah Perry's work, that the flying serpent, or strange news out of Essex, being a true relation of a monstrous serpent which hath diverse times been seen at a parish called Henham on the Mount, 4 miles south from Walden. And that's dating from around 1669. And that example is taken from popular news sheets or news books that carried vivid tales to capture the imagination. and the illustration serving as contemporary evidence to confirm the report. Now here, as in fake news stories now, it doesn't matter whether the facts are true. The psychological pleasure is derived from the story's sensationalist nature. It also offered the reader the sense of being party to startling, secret, or new information, sating a desire to be in the know. And that may be why, as a study conducted at Iowa State University, based on 12 years of data, concluded that tweets, or X posts now, containing falsehoods reach people 6 times faster than truthful tweets. And that's not because bots are sharing them. That study actually removed as many of the bots as could be detected. Now, the researchers analysing those postings containing false information found that those postings were more novel and they generated more extreme emotional reactions that in turn prompted it to be shared again. And celebrity gossip works in a similar way, although with the added draw of moral judgment, where we might feel better about our own lives by commenting on the dysfunctionality of those with fame or money. And that is one of the reasons why the Mail Online is the most visited English language online global newspaper. And it's also the case that we confirm these stories because they tell us not necessarily what is true, but what we want to believe. So truth doesn't matter in this context, rather what individuals find credible in line with their own pre-existing belief systems. Work on cognitive bias demonstrates that we are instinctively motivated to defend our own beliefs and then seek out evidence to confirm them. Becoming aware of our own biases and then curtailing them is, as I think we will all admit, really very difficult, especially if those biases are deeply lodged or fundamental to our identities in some way. And we might think that confronting those biases with facts that undermine our assumptions will prompt us to question our own thoughts and rethink our position. Not necessarily so. Researchers found that providing facts to correct mis- or disinformation may have limited effect at best and can even intensify the original mistaken belief. As the sociologist Tristan Bridges wrote of Brendan Nyhan and Jason Reifler's work on the so-called backfire effect, fighting the ill-informed with facts is like fighting a grease fire with water. It seems like it should work, but it's actually going to make things worse. It is far more comfortable to have our own opinions validated than to have them challenged. And that's why social media is such a breeding ground for mis- and disinformation. It puts us in a bubble. It puts us in an echo chamber where we hear what we want to hear, where we live in a news silo, and where it is possible to find evidence to support whatever belief we want, and particularly our primary beliefs, and where we can ignore or discount those opinions that just don't fit. And all of that might explain why mis- and disinformation might take root. But why do we share it? Why does it spread so quickly? And I'm going to focus a little bit on rumour in the Second World War, where a lot of my work's focused. Because belligerents in that war were obsessed with the potentially destructive power of rumour to collapse military and civilian morale. Now, what did governments do? This is quite an extraordinary story, I think. Governments set up apparatus to collect and control rumours. In Britain, in 1940, the Ministry of Information, which was the state's propaganda body, set up an anti-lies bureau to harvest rumours circulating particularly about the broadcasts of Nazi propagandist Lord Haw to the UK. The US, though, created a vast network of rumour clinics where individuals could turn up at the clinic, or indeed your local hairdresser. The pubs were set up in this format as well, and you could purge yourselves of the rumours. You could tell someone else the misinformation you'd heard, and where social psychologists could then log, analyse and report rumours and publish rebuttals in the press. And all of that work, thank you say the historians, left a vast record of all of the rumours in circulation during the war and that are ripe for historical analysis. So, what did they reveal? Rumours in wide circulation, both in the US and Britain, tended to cluster around predictable themes: resources, lack of and rationing, military defeats and failures, prediction of victory and defeat, threat to the home front, in the UK primarily around potential targets for aerial bombardment, leaders, health and death. So someone was unwell, someone was on death's door, and that could be a good or a bad thing. So a lot of rumours in Britain were about the rumoured death of Hitler, for example, which people thought would bring about the end of the war. Those who were and were not contributing to the war effort, and of course government stability. Now, those rumours were classified by wartime social psychologists as being motivated by hope, fear, hate, anxiety, wishes, hostility, and panic. And those classifications reflected their interpretation of rumour-mongering as a means of expressing concerns that otherwise couldn't be aired. For example, in a highly charged, patriotic environment where sharing negative thoughts might be considered defeatist, leading to social ostracisation. And equally, they found that sharing a rumour might be a form of primitive fact-checking, where news might be scarce, partial, or perceived as untrustworthy. Think when you last shared a rumour, what you were doing. Were you trying to sense check something? Were you trying to find something out? Have you heard that? You are testing something. Now that theory was furthered some 20 years later by the sociologist Tamutsu Shibutani. Rumour, he argued, is a form of improvised news where individuals or groups construe a meaningful interpretation by pooling their intellectual resources. It functions, he argued, as a means of predicting new developments in a fast-moving, changeable and unstable situation so that we can prepare ourselves for all possibilities. He defined it as an act of collective problem solving and part and parcel of our efforts to come to terms with the volatility of life. And that happens especially at times of crisis or sustained collective tension. And it serves as a mechanism for reasserting individual control when individuals perceive themselves to be powerless and where events appear unpredictable. And it's for that reason that Shibutani suggested rumours are provoked by events which are not completely self-explanatory. And that observation resonated with wartime psychologists' findings that behind most rumours lies an unstructured area which has been made conspicuous by the occurrence of some striking event. And that extraordinary, just one example of that, the extraordinary number and persistence of rumours relating to the flight of Rudolf Hess to Britain in May 1941. This is completely out of the blue. The Deputy Führer has flown from Germany and landed in Scotland. It took everyone by surprise, and that's testament to the observation of Shibutani. Those rumours lasted well beyond the war years and were global in scale. So in short, those looking at these rumours in the Second World War concluded that passing on misinformation is not irrational. It is a very human thing to do, motivated by very human needs, whether as a form of exhibitionism, the need to assert status, being in the know, a means of entertaining another person and gaining popularity, to bond with others, to prepare individually and collectively for the unexpected, for reassurance and emotional support, to externalize fears, wishes and hostilities. The thing about rumour is that we all do it, and we know we all do it, and we all do it for a reason. So next time you hear yourself saying, "Have you heard?" stop yourself and ask why you are doing that, because it will tell you something. Now that may be why we share mis and disinformation, and suggest some of the ingredients that might make for successful propaganda. But it doesn't explain the actual effect of any particular piece of propaganda, misinformation or disinformation. That is an extraordinarily difficult question to answer. Does it actually make us act, behave or think in a different way? And historically, understanding that connection between the propaganda and the action or thought is incredibly difficult to do, beyond the superficial measure of an opinion poll, which tends to focus on an opinion at a given moment in time and what you are prepared to tell another person. For example, voting intentions. In the 80s, voting intentions started to be done by computer over the telephone, because they thought that your voting intentions, telling someone how you were going to vote, was something that maybe you would not share with another person unless you trusted them. Advances in technology mean that we're able to estimate the degree of penetration of disinformation and how it circulates, but we still don't really know what effects it has. Researchers on the computational propaganda project at the Oxford Internet Institute concluded that we still know very little about the actual influence of highly automated accounts on individual political attitudes, aspirations and behaviours, although we've certainly seen examples of where false information, misinformation has prompted individuals to act. But we also don't know about the effects of the exposure over a longer period of time to fake news, whether automated or not. And it's significant, though, that despite a paucity of scientific evidence, much suspicion about the negative consequence and harms of fake news falls on technology. Yet, after extensive analysis of the 2016 election campaign in the US, the scholars Benkler, Farris and Roberts noticed that while most public discussion of the threats to democracy focused on novel and technological causes rather than the long-term institutional and structural causes, the latter, the institutional and structural causes, is more critical in determining behaviours and thoughts over time. Why then do we place particular emphasis on the responsibility of technology in this process? First, because it's novel, it's immediate, and because our panics over communications tend to coincide with crises. Technology becomes a useful scapegoat. Secondly, because it's seen as something solvable and controllable. We made it, we can stop it. Technology is the cause. Technology can be the solution. And if we see communications technology as the cause of the problem, solutions become quick, they become possible, and they become tangible. And we're not required to confront the fundamental and ultimately the more complex issue of ideological, political, systemic reform or human behaviour. That propaganda has historically been perceived as a social harm requiring scientific or technological intervention has been reflected in the language used to describe its inner workings and potential solutions. The social scientists of the 1920s and 1930s often invoked the vocabulary of disease and immunology, with propaganda being a hypodermic needle injecting falsehoods into our system. They advocated that we be purged of our impulses to consume propaganda, to be cured, or that we might be vaccinated or inoculated against its effects. Misinformation is a virus, an infection, it's malignant. Well, such language transforms propaganda, mis and disinformation into a pathological condition. And that ignores, ultimately, its dynamics and how it functions. And that language still dominates our search for solutions today, solutions that have frequently been tried in the past and that have failed. Using inoculation theory, recent studies have concluded that we can paralyze disinformation by exposing the techniques used to deceive us. What if we could cure ourselves of the urge to spread and consume fake news? Vaccinate ourselves by teaching people the tactics used in the news industry. This is not new. In 1937, a group of American social scientists, historians and journalists, alarmed by the spread of misleading information and propaganda's potential to undermine democracy, sound familiar, set up an organization, the Institute of Propaganda Analysis. And it was designed to provide factual information to the public, to fact-check public and political discourse, and to teach the public how propaganda works. And they worked in schools, in universities, they sent out publications to individual subscribers across the United States. And their aim was to demystify propaganda in order to neutralize its effects. And the IPA did this by exposing propaganda's inner workings, by providing in-depth and complex analyses of specific campaigns, accompanied by what they termed as worksheets. You'd have to sit and work through and work it through for yourself, and then you could deconstruct it, you could analyze it. And readers were then expected to read the analysis provided and then undertake exercises to train their minds to unpick propaganda. And understanding that the individual probably wouldn't have the desire, not the time, to read long treatises and do the homework, the IPA produced the 7-point schema, distilling propaganda into 7 distinct forms that may feel familiar. Name calling, attaching labels names with negative connotations, Sleepy Joe. We still see these. Glittering generalities, we may have confronted these in our time. Transforming a negative into a positive by attaching a positive term. We wish to build a wall to preserve our patriotic homeland. Transfer, endorsing views by carrying over trusted views from one arena to another. Ending a political speech by offering a prayer. Testimonial, getting celebrities to back you up. Plain folks, invoking the wisdom of the crowd. Brexit is the will of the people. Card stacking, cherry-picking information while ignoring other facts, information out of context. The bandwagon, crowd mentality. Everyone is thinking this, why aren't you? Distill it down. Now, this schema and I really love this. And you feel free to take a picture in case you want to do the same. This schema was placed on small cards for insertion in a wallet. So, if as an individual you came across propaganda, you could whip out your card and identify the propaganda. You could be permanently armed to combat propaganda wherever you are. And if you suspected any wrongdoing, you could check it, analyze the technique, and acquire immunity. Now, here's the next shocker. The Institute of Propaganda Analysis was short-lived. It closed in 1942. The IPA publicly declared that with the United States' entry into the war, propaganda could no longer be classified as neutral. It has now become a weapon, and logical consideration of all sides of the argument was unpatriotic. However, more realistically, the IPA was unsustainable with low impact. Its bulletin only ever reached 3,000 subscribers, and numbers were falling fast. And those engaged with its work were very likely those who already had an interest in propaganda and its inner workings, and were citizens perhaps possessed of a critical and skeptical mind. So, if propaganda or misinformation, disinformation can't really be controlled with inoculation, why not legislate? So much discussion today centres on the need for legislative controls to be placed on the circulation of fake news, specifically in relation now to social media platforms. But the key issue remains the same as it did in the past. Much fake news, though not all, remains deeply political. And where is the balance between the need to restrict information and free speech? Who decides on what constitutes restricted content, especially as mis and disinformation is not bounded by national jurisdictions? How would you legislate in that environment? Now, where restrictions of that kind have historically been enacted, for example in wartime, where there's a need to censor certain types of information for security reasons, there have been unintended and counterproductive consequences. So, for example, in Britain during the Second World War, the public broadly appreciated that there was a need to protect national interests, but that appreciation ran alongside increased suspicion that the state was using the opportunity that war provided to censor opinion or to withhold information. Human instinct, the desire to know, and the uncomfortable sense that something was being concealed or deliberately kept back, pushed individuals to seek out information from alternative sources, perhaps highly suspect sources that might cause harm. It's no accident that the peak period of overt censorship in Britain and suspicion of public sources such as the BBC coincided with the peak period of listening to Nazi propaganda broadcast to the UK. It was estimated that from January to March 1940, Lord Haw Haw attracted 6 million regular listeners and 18 million occasional listeners. So that was roughly 40% of the population, and that was much higher than would have been desirable. Now, attempts to criminalise the spreading of mis or disinformation met with similar problems. Trials for those caught rumour-mongering in Britain during the Second World War met with public condemnation. Prosecuting those engaged in careless talk seemed to many to be heavy-handed, a government attempt to restrict an activity that many regarded as intrinsic to national life, the right to complain and gossip, a natural human behaviour fulfilling important emotional and psychological needs at a time of crisis. Now, to prosecute careless talkers was a move that many equated with the authoritarian mindset that they were fighting to destroy. So liberal democratic state attempts to control the flow of information frequently brush up against freedoms enjoyed, freedoms that are highly valued, hard won, and vigorously defended. And such tensions extend deep into history. One might point to Charles II's 1675 decision to close the coffee houses, citing his desire to prevent the circulation of false news surrounding the Anglo-Dutch War. That, too, was a move that ultimately failed. Of course, all of these measures continue to define our engagement with propaganda, mis- and disinformation as pathological rather than human. And it's in understanding the humanity of our engagement with it that the solutions may lie. Firstly, we need to appreciate that lasting solutions cannot be found in quick fixes or in generalized understandings of complex problems. There's a trend towards solutionism here, and this is especially prevalent in political circles. Politics is increasingly reactive, partly prompted by a fast-moving media environment, resulting in knee-jerk reactions, where we may need more slow thinking when it comes to complex and endemic issues. We need responses to the issues surrounding fake news to be realistic and to be proportionate. It's also significant that those who purport to be the saviours here may be part of the problem. For example, politicians who advocate the restriction of communications platforms while failing to reflect on what their own contribution to the problem might be. There are some current politicians who flagrantly eschew facts and denounce expertise. And it's incumbent on all of us to reassert the value and validity of facts as they are currently known to us now, underpinned by legitimate evidence, and challenge those who undermine it. There are not alternative facts, rather alternative opinions, which need to be clearly identified and labelled as such. There is, in some quarters, a concerted attempt to sow confusion and to persuade us that we should mistrust all information. Truths here become fragmented, and that's the real danger. One only has to think of climate change to imagine the catastrophic consequences of alternative facts, or where, due to anti-vaccine rumours, we've witnessed the resurgence of diseases that have been all but eradicated, or where so-called cures for COVID during the pandemic pose serious threats to public health. In this environment, where all facts are contested, or where even mainstream politicians are in the business of dismissing uncomfortable truths as fake news, we will increasingly succumb to illogical emotional impulses, hastened by a loss of investigative journalism, where the place of expert opinion in society is contested, and where the sheer volume of information ensures that objective facts are buried or lost. Both some elements of the press and some politicians need to reassert the need for expertise and for fact, label opinion, and calm the rhetoric. And that may help in restoring public faith in politics and in the mainstream media, both of which are critical to the issue of tackling fake news. We also need to be cognizant of the fact that we live in a digital world, and the skills that we need to navigate it as citizens are different and are changing, or at least our existing skills need to be translated into new environments. Critical digital literacy and information literacy are essential. Schools, education, and civic programs aimed at teaching people how to receive information, how to analyze and identify online information, and how to think critically should be in our toolkit to curb fake news and mitigate, if not entirely eliminate, its possible effects. Now, that is not to say that technological solutions such as altering the algorithm that determines which news we see first and which information is prioritized should be neglected. They're part of an answer, but they have to be used in combination with longer-term remedies. As David Kennewan, the higher education journalist, notes, technology, such as improved algorithms and deflating the attention economy, can only address today's threats. Only education can defend against tomorrow's. First, and finally, we must accept that since propaganda works on our own pre-existing beliefs and biases, we too have a role to play. And we have a responsibility to self-regulate, to stop people circulating or to pause and think before you circulate information, misinformation online. History has demonstrated that propaganda operates through a series of intricate, flexible interactions between the propagandist and the recipient. As such, propaganda becomes a reciprocal transaction, an ongoing process involving persuader and persuadee, the propagandist and us. It's a dynamic and responsive process, and it's for that reason that it's most successful when tapping into our pre-existing beliefs or responding to a critical or primal need or feeling. Recognizing this is to simultaneously assert our own power over propaganda's effects and denote our responsibility to confront our own pre-existing beliefs and biases when consuming information, however difficult that may be, and certainly not to surrender our essential critical and skeptical capacities. Thank you.